So we're looking into Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it reads as follows: everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right shall include freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice, and freedom, either individually or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. Now, notice the player or subject is everyone, and that's strictly referring to the human being, to the man or woman. That's why later on in this article of law, you see the personal pronoun being expressed of his choice and his religion. So it's referring to a man or a woman, not a statutory creature in law. And the article of law goes on to say that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So three subject matters right here: freedom of thought, subject number one; freedom of conscience, subject number two; and freedom of religion, subject number three. Now the verse goes on to say that they have freedom to manifest his religion or belief in worship. So now they added another subject, right? So we have the subject of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. And they tied in belief with religion, separate from freedom of thought and separate from freedom of conscience. The article of law goes on to say in subsection 3, freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary to protect public safety, order, health, or morals of the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. So they say limitations can be placed on these rights. Well, which rights? Well, they only enumerated and they only listed two of the four. And the two that they listed was religion or belief. The right to the freedom of thought and the right to the freedom of conscience was not indicated in subsection 3. Therefore, the state party, the country that you abide in, cannot place a limiting factor upon those rights. That means those rights are absolute and non derogable, and the state has no power or authority over them because they are rights that existed before the creation of the state. They are absolute natural rights. That's why when you look in the ICCPR under Article 4, you see that Article 18 is considered a non derogable right, an absolute right. Yes, but not all the rights under Article 18, correct? Because we saw four mentioned there: freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, and freedom of belief. And two of those rights, the freedom of religion and the freedom of belief, can be subjected to limitations. The other two, the freedom of thought and the freedom of conscience, are not subjected to limitation. Therefore, according to Article 4.2, the freedom of thought and the freedom of conscience remains a non derogable right, not subjected to any limitations by the state party. And when you look back to Article 18, right, only certain attributes, only certain characteristics of those rights, the freedom of religion and the freedom of belief, can be limited or restricted. And the article says freedom to manifest. So to manifest one's religions or belief can be restricted. Not freedom to hold the belief, not freedom to adopt the belief, but restrictions on the manifestation of the belief. And again, it's not restrictions on your right to hold the belief or choose the belief. Why? Because that's your absolute right. That's your freedom of thought and that's your freedom of conscience. And if they try and place a limitation on that, they're abridging your absolute right. That's why they wrote Article 3 like this. They didn't say freedom to think or freedom to hold or freedom to believe is restricted. They said freedom to manifest that religion or manifest that belief is restricted. But the actual action, the freedom of thought, and the freedom of conscience, this can never be limited and bridged. And this is the principle of justice. And this is the rule of law. The Government of Canada website, better known as the Privy Council, better known as Prince Charles, but Canada's website. And here they write, the rights and freedoms in the Charter are not absolute. That's an action aimed at the destruction of human rights. That's a statement that suppresses human rights. That's a crime against humanity. And that's a crime against the people of Canada. And they go on to further say, they can be limited to protect other rights or important national values. So let's look at Article 2 and let's watch their illegal operation of law as Canada tries to destroy absolute human rights and as Canada makes themselves accountable under the Crimes Against Humanity enactment. Subset Article 2 of the Charter. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms, which they just said are not absolute, and which they just said we can place a limitation against: freedom of conscience, and freedom of religion, freedom of thought, and freedom of belief. All right, let's just stop right here and deal with those four subject matters, just like we saw in international law, right? And in international law, two of these subject matters are absolute rights, are non derogable rights, and they are not subject to any limitation or abridgment by the state party, that being the freedom of conscience and the freedom of thought. So Canada just made up their own operation of law. They just made up their own rule of law. They just made up their own principles of justice. And what they made up is garbage. It's illegal. It's against the real rule of law. And they said that they have the right to place a limitation against your freedom of thought or your freedom of conscience. But when we look into international law, the freedom of thought and the freedom of conscience is never subjected to any limitation because it's an absolute non derogable right. But you just altered that right. And you just changed the nature and the attribute of that right. And that is a crime against humanity. And that is a crime against the people of Canada. To pretend and to play off like you have the authority and the power to place limitations on those rights is illegal. And this video and this operation of law and what you have done here is now being designated evidence number one for the public, and many more are to come, against your actions, against your crimes against humanity, to steal away their rights, to limit their absolute rights. The United Nations, their own declaration from the General Council, Article 18 of the ICCPR, distinguishes the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief from the freedom to manifest religion or belief. So they're telling you it is distinguished. It does not permit any limitations whatsoever on the freedom of thought and conscience, or on the freedom to have or adopt a religion or belief of one's choice. So the UN has declared that it does not permit limitations whatsoever on the freedom of thought or conscience. And Canada, you have been caught in a lie. Worse than that, you have been caught taking actions aimed at the destruction of absolute human rights. You are partaking in crimes against humanity. You are destroying and stealing human beings rights and freedoms. And you do not have the right to do that. And you have been caught red-handed in your actions. There's no excuse. You are taking actions aimed at a particular group. You are suppressing human rights illegally.